Welcome to our explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most famous journeys in history, the Exodus. But here's the thing, this isn't really a story about geography or miles traveled. It's about a 40-year lesson for the human heart, a journey where the real goal was never about speed, it was all about transformation.
All right, so let's just jump right into the big question, the paradox at the center of this whole story. 40 years. I mean, that number just feels impossibly long, right? Especially when you think about the actual physical distance. So, what was really going on here?
You can just see the disconnect, can't you? In our world, this is a road trip, a few days in a car. Even back then, leading a huge caravan on foot, 40 years is just extreme. So right away, we know the miles on the map can't be the real story. The reason for that timeline has to be somewhere much, much deeper.
And that's because when you look at the source material, it's pretty clear this map and this timeline were never really about logistics. They were about revealing something fundamental, something about how God works with our human limitations, with our messiness, and our readiness or unreadiness to change.
So here's the crucial point. God wasn't in a rush to get a bunch of people to a new address. The real priority was carefully, patiently preparing those people for that destination. The journey itself became the whole point. It was this long, drawn-out process of unlearning one way of life and learning a completely new one. And to really get this, we have to look at how the narrative itself is paced. The story doesn't just rush from point A to point B. It intentionally slows way, way down at these key moments. It turns what could have just been historical pit stops into these foundational lessons for an entire people. And this just lays it all out, doesn't it? This isn't a travelogue, it's a curriculum. Every one of these moments, Passover, crossing the Red Sea, the whole experience at Sinai, these were the classrooms. These were the moments where a group of traumatized, newly freed slaves started to forge a totally new identity, not just as survivors, but as a people with a real purpose. Okay, but this whole learning process, it was anything but smooth. The biggest obstacle on this entire journey wasn't a lack of food or water or even a lack of miracles. No, it was the overwhelming internal noise of the crowd itself. Wow, this is such a powerful idea, right? They were physically free, but their whole way of thinking was still stuck in slavery. They were used to being told what to do, to having their meals handed to them, to having zero responsibility for their own choices. So real freedom, with all of its uncertainty, it was absolutely terrifying. This slide just perfectly breaks down the core conflict. It wasn't just Moses versus the people. It was two completely different mindsets clashing in the desert. You had Moses, looking ahead, trying to listen for a future promise. And then you had the crowd, just listening to the rumble of their own empty stomachs and their own fears, totally trapped in the crisis of the moment. And that's the real danger of groupthink, isn't it? When everyone around you is panicking, complaining starts to sound like common sense. Turning back starts to feel like the most rational, logical thing to do. It's not that the crowd was evil, they just amplified their fear until it was the only voice they could hear. And that brings us to the engine that was driving the crowd, fear. Pure and simple. And fear is a powerful motivator, for sure. But it also has a serious, serious limitation. Look, fear is great for basic survival. It can absolutely make you obey orders to avoid getting in trouble. It can keep you putting one foot in front of the other when you're terrified. But here's what fear can't do. It can't make you grow. It can't teach you to love. And it can't inspire you to choose what's right just because it's right, especially when nobody's forcing you to. And honestly, if you take one thing away from this whole explainer, let it be this. Fear was just enough to get the Israelites out of Egypt, but it was nowhere near enough to get them to the promised land as a people ready to build something new. Fear can start the journey, but it can never, ever complete the transformation. So if fear is the engine that gets you started, but eventually runs out of gas, what was this 40-year journey supposed to build in its place? Well, the answer is a much more powerful, much more lasting motivator: trust. This is what that whole 40-year detour was about. It was designed to guide this massive shift from the old way of fear to the new way of trust. A shift from just following rules to actually building a relationship, from forced compliance to making a mature choice. It's a difference between just surviving and truly being formed. And this is exactly why the journey had to be so long and had to go through the wilderness. You see, trust isn't built in one big, flashy miracle. No, it's forged slowly, over time, in all those small, uncertain moments where the path ahead is totally foggy and you have no choice but to rely on your guide. Okay, so let's pull all these pieces together. The weird map, the impossibly long timeline, the struggle with fear, and the slow, painful building of trust. It all points to the real purpose of the Exodus. When you look back at that winding path, at the decades spent seemingly going in circles, all the repeated tests and trials, a new priority just snaps into focus. The geographical destination, as important as it was actually secondary. And that's the ultimate takeaway. The destination was a place, but the purpose was a people. The entire 40-year ordeal was like a crucible designed to melt down a terrified mob of former slaves and reforge them into a resilient community, a community that could actually build a new world based on trust and responsibility. And that leaves us with a final thought, doesn't it? It turns this ancient story into a kind of mirror for our own lives. In all the long, confusing, and sometimes frustrating journeys we find ourselves on, maybe the most important question isn't, when am I going to get there? Maybe it's, who am I becoming along the way?